Blast light is the world's smallest and most convenient UVC disinfection light to help keep you safe against COVID-19. I take mine everywhere I go. Go to davidpakman.com/blastlight to get it for 40% off. The link is down below. We're starting today with a story that comes to us from the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, the country of Haiti, where the Haitian president was assassinated in his home early yesterday morning. The New York Times has a very good article summing this up called "Haiti's President Assassinated in Nighttime Raid, Shaking a Fragile Nation." A group of assailants stormed Mr. Moise's residence early on Wednesday, shooting him and wounding his wife, the interim prime minister declaring a state of siege. The first explosions took place around 1 a.m., and this took place at the home of President Jovenel Moise. And this is a wealthy neighborhood. Residents immediately feared two of the terrors that have plagued the nation, gang violence or an earthquake. But by the morning, they had learned that the president was dead. A group of assailants had stormed Mr. Moise's residency on the outskirts of the capital, Port-au-Prince, early Wednesday, shooting him and wounding his wife, Martine Moise, in what officials called a well-planned operation that included foreigners who spoke Spanish. Much is being made of the Spanish aspect of it, although it's really too early to know too much about what that means. In a televised broadcast to the nation's interim prime minister, Claude Joseph, appealed for calm and presented himself as the new head of government, announcing that he and his fellow ministers had declared a state of siege and placed Haiti under a form of martial law. The assassination left a political void that deepened the turmoil and violence that has gripped Haiti for months, threatening to tip one of the world's most troubled nations further into lawlessness. You know, I'm not sure how much people in the audience know about the history of Haiti. Haiti is on a landmass that is an island that is shared with another country, the Dominican Republic. Haiti in the east and the Dominican Republic. Haiti in the west and the Dominican Republic to the east. The island is called Hispaniola. And there are really, really racist, crude, quote, explanations that are given for why, okay, the Dominican Republic is not a wealthy country, but it is significantly better off than Haiti, which is the poorest country in the West. And maybe you can imagine what that racist analysis is, but it's quite this simple. Haiti is black people, whereas the Dominican Republic is Latino folks, often with more of European origin. I mean, that's the white nationalist sort of crude racist explanation for the disparity between Haiti and the Dominican Republic economically and in other ways. Now, this is actually something that's been studied extensively. Jared Diamond, in his book Collapse, which I read just not too long ago, actually talks a lot about it. And when you understand the differences in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, including the placement of Haiti in the West and the Dominican Republic in the East, and what that means in terms of current, what that means in terms of rainfall, elevation, early deforestation happening in Haiti due to lack of other natural resources, you really start to understand that there's a very complex situation, in fact, in the country. And unfortunately, this has led to a situation of significant instability in Haiti, political problems, environmental degradation, and so many other things. And now this on top of it, just a horrible, horrible situation. The New York Times adding the details of who shot the president and why remained unknown. 4 people suspected of being involved in the assassination were killed by the police in a gun battle, and 2 others were arrested, Haiti's police chief said late yesterday. The chief, Leon Charles, also said that 3 police officers who had been held hostage were freed. The authorities did not name any of the suspects or cite any evidence linking them to the assassination. The other thing I think that's important to mention is there were some early mentions of the assailants claimed to be DEA. Now, the American DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, does have a presence in Haiti, and it's still so early that there were some folks who immediately said, oh, the DEA carried this out. Every indication so far is that the assailants falsely claimed to be DEA agents. There is no evidence at this time that the DEA carried out this assassination. This doesn't mean that the U.S. through the CIA and other agencies hasn't been involved in political assassinations in the past. That's not what it means. It just means in this case, there is no evidence that that's the reality. All we know is that the assailants claimed to be DEA agents based on one report. So we're going to continue following this. Of course, the hope is that Haiti does not devolve into even more chaos and instability, because that's the last thing that the Haitian people need. There have already been some questions about, will the U.S. help? And I know that makes a lot of people very, very scared of what does it mean when the U.S. helps in the Caribbean, in Central America, and in Latin America. And I get that. But let's keep our analyses based on what is known rather than what is hypothesized or speculated at this point in time. And hopefully in the next 2 to 3 days, there's going to be more clarity there. We are starting to see a softening in the pandemic recovery. And yeah, some of it has to do with anti-vaxxers. What has been a fantastic, 80, 85, even 90% recovery from the pandemic, and I mean economically, and I also mean from a public health standpoint, is now slowing down. Now, you might be saying, whoa, David, wait a second. Are you criticizing the state of play in the United States during a Democratic administration? I thought you were a Democratic shill, or a shield, as someone recently called me. No, you guys know, many of you know, I've never been a Democrat. I don't really care about the Democratic Party. I just call things the way they are. And we are now seeing jobless claims up and higher than expected. Initial jobless claims for the week ending July 3rd came in at 373,000 new jobless claims. That's higher than the 350,000 that was expected. Initial unemployment claims had been on the decline, big picture, for months now, but we're now seeing a reversal. Jobless claims going up. Meanwhile, there are broader concerns about the global economic comeback. Anecdotally, Japan has now declared a state of emergency in Tokyo, and COVID cases are surging globally. They're surging in a number of countries and overall, and they're also up a bit, actually close to 20% in the United States. Check out these numbers. Around the world, cases had bottomed out in mid-June at about 360,000 a day. Globally, cases are now up 12% just in the last few weeks to over 400,000 cases a day. This is believed to be mostly because of the more contagious Delta variant. Sometimes people see something on the news, more contagious Delta variant. That doesn't really mean anything. No, we are seeing, because it spreads more easily, 12% more cases globally per day. There's now an even more contagious Lambda variant. We don't yet know much about it, which could be the next to spread and become dominant. So cases up 12% globally. In the United States, cases are up 20%. We had gotten down to about 12,000 cases a day in the U.S. We are now up to more than 14,000 cases a day in the U.S. That is a big jump. Now, so far, fortunately, we are not seeing higher deaths. But remember that deaths lag cases by weeks. The hope would be, the optimistic scenario is, even though we're seeing more cases because Delta's more contagious, if you're vaccinated, you still are unlikely to get hospitalized if you get the virus, and you're unlikely to die if you get the virus, if you are vaccinated. That's the hope. We don't really know that yet. We need another 3 to 4 weeks to see if that's the case. And meanwhile, 20% of Americans still don't want the vaccine. If you care about public health, you would go and you would get the vaccine. If you care about the economy, you would go and you would get the vaccine. If you care about avoiding another sort of shutdown to some degree in the fall, you would go and you get the vaccine. What are we doing here? Let's put up this pathetic chart of U.S. vaccinations per day, and you will see, if you were watching today, that we are basically down to the level of daily vaccination that we saw in January. Now, think back to that, okay? In January, we had almost no vaccines. It was healthcare workers, and I think we were starting to make the vaccine available to the oldest and most vulnerable. We are vaccinating the same amount of people now when we have full availability. You just walk in In many places, you don't even need an appointment. You just get vaccinated. And somehow we are vaccinating no more people over the last week than we were doing in mid-January, when availability was close to, not literally zero, but it was very, very low. And in other countries, people are just sitting. They're waiting for the privilege of having the vaccine access that we have. And we are seeing it reflected, not just in the case numbers, but in the economic uncertainty as well. And so my appeal is, if you don't care about other people, if you just don't want to get vaccinated because you have assessed that you were at low risk, either accurately or not, and you don't really care about other people or whatever else, do you care about the economy? Because the economy is wrapped up in the success of the public health recovery. Come on, guys. The world is desperate for the vaccines that we have an overflow of. Just go and get vaccinated. Let me know your thoughts on this. Do you think that this will continue to worsen, or is this a temporary blip as we hopefully get closer and closer to herd immunity? Let me know. You can find me on Twitter at Pakman, and we will see. I mean, listen, by 10 days from now, we'll have the answer, and hopefully it is a positive one and not a negative one. One of our sponsors is Blast Light, the smallest and most convenient UV disinfection light on the market. COVID is not over. There are new variants. There might be future resurgences. So, of course, it's still important to take precautions, keep yourself safe, keep people around you safe. UVC lights have been proven to safely and rapidly kill bacteria, mold, fungi, and viruses, including COVID-19. Blast Light is a convenient keychain UVC light that you can take wherever you go. I keep it attached to my keys. It goes everywhere with me. It's easy to use. It disinfects any surface in just seconds with a really long battery life, and it's rechargeable. I've looked at a bunch of different UVC light options, and this is by far the most compact and portable one out there. Blast Light is normally $99, but my audience can get it for 40% off, which comes to $59.50 when you go to davidpakman.com/blastlight. The link is underneath this video. Remember that the David Pakman Show does depend on the support of people in our audience to fund the program and to do the things that we do. The primary source of that funding is membership. You can sign up at joinpakman.com. We do an extra show every single day for people who are members. It's quite a show, I will tell you that. And you can use the coupon code BETTER21 if you would like a discount. I say just give everybody the discount. Who cares? Get people involved. You can sign up at joinpakman.com and enjoy the bonus show almost instantly. And yesterday's was a doozy. Let me put it that way. So I have an admission to make that might strike you as a weird thing for someone who hosts a show about American politics to say. I absolutely hate politics. I hate it. And what I mean by that is not that I don't care about the issues that I talk about on the show. I care deeply about the issues that I address on the show. What I mean is I hate the fact that the reason the show is the way it is, and that elections are the way they are, and that the country is the way that it is, and the political system we have is the one we have, is based on a huge portion of this country being a combination of ignorant, bad faith actors and people whose views are completely retrograde and antithetical, immorally antithetical to the direction that we as a country and as a human race should be going. I hate that this is what politics is in the United States. I don't like the fact that when I take phone calls from the audience, part of what I have to do, because the alternative is to allow it to go unchallenged, I hate that part of what I have to do is talk to people with just terrible, ignorant, disgusting ideas rooted in misunderstandings of how the world works and a backwards morality that I find to be despicable, to put it lightly. I don't want to have people like that in my life. It's optional that such people exist. It doesn't have to be this way. We could have a more informed and educated population, but this is what it is. And I hate the fact that this is what it means to engage in politics in the United States. It's dealing with these horrible people and bad ideas. I hate that because of these reactionary right-wing movements, when we have a pandemic, we actually have to fight people just to get them to accept uncontroversial science. It's a waste of time, but it has to be done because it's what we're dealing with. I hate that when we could be figuring out I don't know, how to move away from dirty energy and start treating the planet with some respect and reorganizing our economies and societies to be more sustainable, we're still dealing with people who just don't accept the science. We're still dealing with people who, they don't think abortion should be legal or that two gay people should be able to legally get married. It's disgusting. It's a waste of time. Look at what we have to deal with because of how things work in the United States. And one of the real frustrations of American politics is that, much like some aspects of consumer culture, we're wasting time thinking about the wrong things. What I mean by that is, I recently watched some great interviews with the late author David Foster Wallace, whose book Infinite Jest I'm reading now. And one of the things that struck me about his sort of critique of consumer culture, and even David Foster Wallace's critique of much of the kind of literary analysis space, is that we spend very little time actually thinking about, are we thinking about the right things? And when we look at the points of focus for American politics and media, is the reality that these are the things we focus on because there are people that are so ignorant and reactionary that they want to fight us on them. You then start to realize how much we're really missing in our ability to make progress. And I'll give you some examples. Here in the United States, the modern political media space ends up saying very little about what are some of the biggest questions of our time right now. Are we as a human race advanced enough and wealthy enough to end abject poverty, end that degree of human suffering, and make sure everybody is at least housed and fed? This is a really fundamental and basic question, and the answer is obviously yes. It's a matter of political will. We should just be figuring out, hey, you know what? We've got the money and we've got the know-how. Let's end abject poverty. Let's end global hunger. But it becomes completely intractable because we have to deal with people who immediately go to socialist this and communist that and Trumpian free markets and supply side economics. I mean, trash, truly trash. Another question. Are we going to figure out a way to organize ourselves so that we can live what I would call sustainably on this planet? We can do it. It's a matter of how we do it, not whether we need to. And we are rapidly advancing in so many technologies, solar, electric vehicles, geothermal, carbon capture. But instead of having a society that is doing really an incredibly, patriotic or humanistic thing and saying, we are dealing with this right now, we're all together furthering this technology and we're on the same page that we just have to do this for the sake of the human race. We've identified the problem and we're dealing with it. No, instead, we are relegated to arguing with people who won't even accept it's a problem, who think it makes a scientific point to bring a snowball indoors in Washington, D.C. in winter. It's just a total garbage situation. And so what I mean when I say I seriously hate politics is that I hate that this is what we have to deal with when we engage with the political system. Now, obviously, to change the system, you have to engage with it. If you just ignore the system, bury your head in the sand, you accomplish nothing other than letting the people with the worst instincts make all the decisions. That's tragic and that's devastating. And so in order to fix American politics, we do have to pay attention and we do have to engage with these retrograde, disgusting, baseless ideas. And that's what I mean by hating politics, because we have to face the reality that often feels like half or more of the people around us are quite literally working against the best interests of humanity. I don't think we have much of a choice, but it's not good. It's not good. And it's what I mean by saying I hate it. And if you think that there's a way to change it without engaging with it, let me know. But I don't see that we have much of a choice. While we were on vacation, Fox News host Tucker Carlson made the baseless claim, at least as far as he's presented evidence, that the NSA, the National Security Agency, had been spying on him. And then the story disappeared for a little bit until yesterday. Tucker appeared on the Fox Business program Mornings with Maria, hosted by the notorious Trump brown-noser Maria Bartiromo. Tucker is now saying that he recently learned that it will soon come out that not only has the NSA been spying on him, but the NSA leaked the contents of his emails to journalists in an effort to discredit him in relation to, I guess, seeking an interview with Vladimir Putin. Now, he says it's not a figment of his imagination, that it is very, very real. So let's look at this interview that he had with Maria Bartiromo. And these are very serious allegations. So let's listen to it.
The NSA spying. Tucker Carlson tonight, host Tucker Carlson, said last week on his program that he has information from a whistleblower showing that the NSA is spying on him and planning to leak sensitive communications to get his show canceled. Tucker joins us right now. Tucker, it's great to have you this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, yeah. You are the only people I get up for, Maria. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, you don't go on TV lightly to say the government is spying on me because you sound like a crazy person. And, of course, you would never say that unless you knew that it was true. And I did know that it was true almost accidentally. I was in Washington for a funeral last week and ran into someone I know well who said, I have a message for you. And then proceeded to repeat back to me details from emails and texts that I sent and had told no one else about. So it was verified, and this person said, look,
Now, what's important to understand here is this is Tucker's assertion, and we have to be able to distinguish between if what Tucker is saying is true, then XYZ, versus simply Tucker is making this assertion and as yet has not presented any evidence for it. Now, the first thing to understand is just because we would be skeptical of this claim because there's not yet been evidence presented doesn't mean that we think the NSA is great or always acts appropriately. And this is a really important thing. In the Trump era, often if you're on the left and you say, hey, you know what? There's really no reason to doubt the FBI when the FBI said X, or there's really no reason to doubt the CIA when the CIA said Y. Sometimes right wingers and even sometimes leftists will say, oh, what? Now you love the CIA, which did all this bad stuff globally for decades? No. We're just looking at these claims. The NSA does spy on people. That's what they do. The NSA could leak stuff, but Tucker has not yet presented evidence, and maybe he will. So we're not laughing this off. If the NSA is spying on Tucker and leaking his emails, I want to know. But as you will see here, he's not yet presenting any evidence. Let's look at a little bit more of this.
It has this, and that was proven by the person repeating back the contents of the email, and is going to use it against you. Now, to be totally blunt with you, I would never have said this in public if it was something I felt was wrong or illegal or immoral. They don't actually have anything on me, but they do have my emails. So I knew they were spying on me. And again, to be totally blunt with you, as a defensive move, I thought I better say this out loud because I have no other way to defend myself. I'm just an American citizen. I don't have, any position of official authority, but I do have a megaphone.
Right. He does have a megaphone. It's a little bit. I mean, listen, when you have one of the top rated shows on one of the three major cable networks, to say you're no one special, essentially, is what he's saying. It's not exactly representative of the spirit of Tucker's privileged position, but let's not harp on that too much.
Say this out loud. And I did. And the NSA didn't deny it. Then yesterday, I learned that, and this is going to come out soon, that the NSA leaked the contents of my email to journalists in an effort to discredit me. I know because I got a call from one of them saying, oh, this is what your email was about. So it is not in any way a figment of my imagination. It's confirmed. It's true. They're not allowed to spy on American citizens. They are.
Okay. So there's a ton of stuff there. Now, Tucker says the NSA didn't deny a part of this. Let's look at what the NSA actually said, because I think it's important to actually see the wording. The NSA put out a statement saying, on June 28th, 2021, Tucker Carlson alleged that the NSA has been, quote, monitoring our communications and is planning to leak them in an attempt to take this show off the air. This allegation is untrue. Tucker Carlson has never been an intelligence target of the agency, and the NSA has never had any plans to try to take his program off the air. NSA has a foreign intelligence mission. We target foreign powers to generate insights on foreign activities that could harm the United States. With limited exceptions, like an emergency, the NSA may not target a U.S. citizen without a court order that explicitly authorizes the targeting. Now, what Tucker is focusing in on there is that the NSA doesn't deny reading his emails. Now, it is possible, and this, with all of the Trump people, American Trump people that were in contact with Russians, when the Russians were being surveilled, which we could say we don't like that this is what the NSA does, but the NSA has a foreign intelligence mission. When the NSA was monitoring Russians, when Trump people communicated with the Russians, incidentally, they observed the communications of the Americans who were in touch with the Russians, right? So Tucker then last night talked in more detail about what this is all about. What if you listen to it, it could explain some of this, okay? And then we'll talk about whether it's okay, I guess.
God, we're happy to report that. Late this spring, I contacted a couple of people I thought could help get us an interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
I told nobody I was doing this other than my executive producer, Justin Wells. I wasn't embarrassed about trying to interview Putin. He's obviously newsworthy.
Sure.
I'm an American citizen. I can interview anyone I want,
Absolutely.
And I plan to. But still, in this case, I decided to keep it quiet. I figured that any kind of publicity would rattle the Russians and make the interview less likely to happen. But the Biden administration found out anyway by reading my emails. I learned from a whistleblower that the NSA planned to leak the contents
So
of those.
first of all, it's important that when you say the Biden administration, that's questionable language for this. If you understand how, Trump was constantly criticizing the FBI for things it did during his administration. If you apply this logic, that was the Trump administration, right? If any action taken by FBI, CIA, or NSA during a presidency is that presidency, that administration doing it, then it was the Trump administration that did all the things that Trump criticized the FBI for. I think that's pretty dubious.
Emails to media outlets. Why would they do that? Well, the point, of course, was to paint me as a disloyal American, a Russian operative, been called that before, a stooge of the Kremlin, a traitor doing the bidding of a foreign adversary. And of course, I'm hardly the only person who's been accused of those things.
So, okay, so let's talk about what's going on here now that we have the full picture. Many of these allegations are just unproven. Okay, the leaks by the NSA to journalists, if there's evidence of that, then I want to see it. I want to know what the NSA is doing. I don't think the NSA is uniquely good or bad. American intelligence agencies sometimes do good things, sometimes they do bad things, sometimes it's not easy to call something good or bad. If Tucker Carlson was in touch with people he may or may not have known are Kremlin agents, Russian intelligence, who knows who Tucker was in touch with in order to try to get an interview with Vladimir Putin. If those people were being monitored by the NSA, then certainly by being in touch with them, Tucker's communications would have ended up monitored by the NSA. This is not hugely shocking or controversial. If you're talking to someone who's under surveillance, like a foreign intelligence target, then by talking to them, you're going to be surveilled. We can debate that's good or bad, but it's not shocking. So, number one, is Tucker going to present proof? We'll have to wait and see. Number two, where was Tucker on this stuff for years when it was happening already? Now, all of a sudden that he believes or is at least claiming it's happening to him, it's his number one issue. So there's a lot of stuff here to clear up, but I want to be really clear. If what Tucker is saying is true, I want to know about it. But it wouldn't be shocking that if Tucker is talking to people, foreign agents being surveilled by American intelligence, it would be logical that his side of the communication is also going to be subject to that surveillance. Not defending it, but it's exactly what you would expect. Let me know your thoughts. We'll have more of this on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome to the program today Bill Browder, who is the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, and also author of the book Red Notice. So, Bill, to start with, the story you tell in your book includes, as you got into the world of finance, your interest in Eastern Europe, which included initially doing some work in Poland when there was relatively little work being done in Poland by US and British-based folks in the finance world, and eventually actually going to Russia itself. Talk a little bit about how that all worked and how you ended up working in that part of the world.
Sure. So I went out to Russia in 1992, just at the beginning of the Russian privatization program. Basically, when the Soviet Union broke up, Russia became a sort of, quote, democracy. The new president wanted to go from communism to capitalism. And in order to do that, they basically, the state owned all the property, and they said, we're going to give all the property away for free to the people and make them capitalists. And of course, as we know, most of the property ended up in the hands of a very small number of Russian oligarchs. But there were little crumbs falling off the table, and those crumbs were shares of some of the biggest Russian companies which were trading on the stock market. And I went and set up a business called the Hermitage Fund to basically pick up those crumbs and invest in the newly privatized companies. And for a while, it was just a bonanza, like bigger profits, I guess, made cryptocurrency gains, look like child's play. It was just so, the returns were so great.
So you eventually got involved in this space where there was the possibility of investing in Russian companies at massive discounts from what traditional finance measures would assess as the value of these companies. Talk a little bit about how that worked, how you got into that.
Well, so the situation was that nobody really understood what was there. It was sort of a state secret. The oil industry was a state secret. All these big companies were not known to the Russians, and the Russians had these vouchers. They called them privatization certificates, and they could invest their vouchers in whatever they wanted to invest them in, or sell their vouchers. And most Russians didn't really think that their vouchers would be worth anything, and so they sold them for a bottle of vodka, and various people were buying up vouchers, and this voucher exchanges formed, and I did the math, and I said, okay, if you buy shares in some of these oil companies, you're buying oil at like 10 cents per barrel of oil reserves in the ground. And at the time, oil prices were, let's say, trading at $30. And so 10 cents in the ground versus $30 out of the ground, that kind of had to be a good deal. And so, but to tell you the truth, it was really hard to get people interested in the West in that. I would say, look, here, these things are trading at a 99.9% discount. And most people, when they heard the word Russia, they ran for the hills. And so it wasn't like this was something that was like a slam dunk, obvious to most people. Most people said, well, whatever the valuations are, I don't want to go anywhere near Russia.
So ultimately, you fell out of favor in Russia, and ultimately were even expelled from the country, legal problems. What went wrong? How did the problem start to develop?
Well, so the companies I ended up becoming the largest foreign investor in Russia. We had $4.5 billion invested in all these companies. And what I discovered was all the companies were basically being robbed blind by these oligarchs who were the majority shareholders. And so I decided to try to start fighting the thievery, the robbing of these companies by exposing it. And in doing so, in these dictatorships and third world countries, business and politics are all sort of intertwined. And so the moment that I started exposing all these nasty things going on, all of a sudden the politics got involved, and I was expelled from the country. I was declared a threat to national security. My offices were raided. They seized all of our documents. And the next thing we knew, those documents were used to perpetrate a highly complex fraud where they then stole our companies and used those companies to steal $230 million of taxes that my company had paid to the Russian government. And so it was all politics mixed with business, mixed with criminality. and I was on the receiving end of all of that stuff.
Right. So people may or may not know, but Russia is a huge country. It has extremely rural areas, and those rural areas have courts, and often those courts are operating under the direction of who knows who in power, bribes, corruption, etc. Talk a little bit about how that all worked. I mean, that was really the basis for how these assets and companies were taken from you.
Yeah, so Russia's a very formalistic place. So it's not like they in like, I don't know, in Mexico or I don't know where, they just grab your stuff and that's done. In Russia, everything is sort of done with some kind of pretense, and so they'll go to the court, and the court the judge will make a decision to transfer your assets to somebody else, and he'll stamp the judgment, and so they love all this sort of procedural bureaucratic stuff, even though you can just unwind it and show that it's all been done fraudulently. For some reason, that doesn't, even if you can show it's done fraudulently, that doesn't bother them. They can all just wave their court decisions in the air based on a, $500 bribe they made to the judge. And that's the order of magnitude of bribes that they probably had to make in order to get these kinds of decisions through the courts.
So you tell one story, and the way I like to sort of, when I read a nonfiction book about something I'm not already familiar with, I first don't look up anything about it. I just read the book, and then I'll look up, well, what are the other perspectives about it? And after reading your book and hearing your story, doing some research as well for this interview, I come across allegations that you were not actually the victim, but you actually were the perpetrator. In other words, you used the systems that you criticize and say that victimized you to actually participate in the corruption and in the fraud. Now, it's beyond my ability to adjudicate these things independently in the context of this interview. You tell one story, there are others who tell another story. But what do you make of the fact that there are these counter allegations that have been made that say you are actually the perpetrator here and not the victim?
Well, first of all, those allegations were made by the people who stole the money. So, so we have just so you know, in Russia, this is what they do. They shoot down a plane going over Russia, and they blame it on the people who were on the plane, or everything is the other guys did it. And in our case, the whole thing is sort of completely absurd from top to bottom. The money was stolen so our companies were stolen, and all of these sort of machinations were done in December, like October, December of 2007. And we filed a criminal complaint with all the major Russian law enforcement agencies after we learned about the theft of our companies. And we put that onto the record. And 3 weeks after we filed our complaint, the tax money was stolen, the $230 million of taxes that we paid. And so what criminals would file a complaint about their upcoming crime before they committed it? There are so many like errors in their story. They also blame the story that they say that Sergei Magnitsky, my dead lawyer, who was killed, by the way, for disclosing this, they say he stole the money and he did it together with another dead guy, and the other dead guy died two months before the crime was committed. And so, these guys are like Keystone Cops when it comes to coming up with a conspiracy theory to blame the other guy.
So there have been multiple red notices placed against you. For people who don't know what a red notice is sort of a global Interpol arrest warrant or arrest directive in a sense. And there were ultimately Interpol decided, as you tell in the book, not to enforce that red notice. They decided this is politically motivated, this is bogus, and they decided not to enforce it. But there was a period of time where, as far as you knew, if you had an interaction with customs or border authorities in any number of countries, you could have been arrested and then extradited to Russia, and then who knows what would have happened. How long was that period of time where that was a concern for you, where you didn't know what would happen?
Well, so the book, I finished writing the book in 2014, And the first Interpol notice from Russia came in 2013. The second one came in 2013. And since the book was written, there have been 8 Interpol notices for my arrest from Russia. And so when you say how long, there's been numerous periods of time, a week here, 2 weeks there, 3 weeks, where if I crossed a border, I would be arrested, sent to Russia to my death. And I was arrested. In May of 2018, I was traveling to Madrid to meet with the Spanish anti-corruption prosecutor to share information about Russian money laundering connected to the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. And as I was walking out of my hotel room before my meeting with the Spanish prosecutor, 2 Spanish national policemen arrested me on a Russian Interpol warrant. And it was only because I was allowed to pack my bags in my hotel room before they took me away that I tweeted out that I was being arrested. And then all hell broke loose with journalists and activists and everybody else calling Interpol, calling the Spanish government, calling everybody else, so that by the time I got to the police station, I was released. But this kind of stuff is pretty scary, and it continues to plague me up until today. The Russians are after me. They've issued, they've found me guilty twice in their courts in absentia, and have sentenced me 18 years in prison. I'd be killed if I went back there, no question.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is you talk in the book about how something that Vladimir Putin will do sometimes when he's asked about individuals that are his adversaries, and this happened with you, he won't say the person's name. And so there was a event you describe in the book where Vladimir Putin was asked about you, and he referred to you, I think, as like the gentleman you're referring to. When I was watching recently the Biden-Putin press conference that took place after their meeting, and Putin was asked about Navalny by a journalist, it was almost verbatim what was said to you. Putin didn't say his name and said something like, the person you're referring to, I believe, has committed crimes in our country, which was, I mean, that's essentially the same language you describe, is it not?
Well, he used that language about me on a number of occasions. But here's the interesting thing. So after the Magnitsky Act was passed, and just for your listeners, the Magnitsky Act is a piece of legislation named after my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, who was murdered after uncovering this $230 million tax fraud that these criminals and corrupt officials committed. The Magnitsky Act was put in place in the United States and other countries, which freezes the assets and bans the visas of Russian human rights violators. Putin got so angry about the Magnitsky Act that he banned the adoption of Russian orphans by American families. He made it his single largest foreign policy priority to repeal the Magnitsky Act. He even sent Natalia Veselnitskaya, a Russian lawyer, to Trump Tower to meet with Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner before Trump was elected, to say, if he's elected, please repeal the Magnitsky Act. But here's the crux. After the Magnitsky Act was passed, he got so upset with me that my name is now mentioned by Vladimir Putin. And in fact, he mentioned it very profoundly when he met with Trump, when Putin met with Trump at the Helsinki summit. And at the end of the summit, there was this question about whether Russia would hand over the 12 GRU officers who hacked the election. And Putin said, well, yeah, we'll hand them over if Trump hands over Bill Browder.
Bill, I so appreciate your time today. The book is Red Notice. Bill Browder is the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management and also head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Great to see you.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right, this you have to see. Just another complete humiliation for the former president, Donald Trump, who has been hyping up or had been hyping up a press conference for yesterday morning, during which he was going to make a major announcement. Right-wing news network Newsmax hyped it up. Fox News talked about it a little bit, but not nearly as much. It leaked. The press conference would be Trump announcing that he is suing, filing a class action lawsuit against Facebook, against Twitter, against Google, because they banned him. And the event was so humiliating and so absurd that Fox News even cut away from it while Trump was answering questions. Let's look at some clips, starting with the big announcement from the former president.
I'm filing as the lead class representative a major class action lawsuit against the big tech giants, including Facebook, Google, and Twitter, as well as their CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai.
Sundar Pichai. That is really, really something else there.
And God bless the United States.
Yeah. Just a little more here.
And Jack Dorsey.
Okay, so that's the big announcement. Trump is really, really mad that he's not allowed to tweet. And so he's suing everybody. And of course, it's an embarrassment that he's even doing this. I mean, everything, including even like, see how he has, it sort of looks like the presidential lectern, but it's not. It's kind of like a low rent copy of it. But where it really gets embarrassing is the guy just doesn't understand the First Amendment. He just doesn't get it.
The founding fathers inscribed this right in the very First Amendment to our Constitution because they knew that free speech is essential to the prevention of horror.
Horror. That's HAHRRAH, if you're wondering.
And to the preservation of our republic.
This has nothing to do with the First Amendment. There is just nothing here related to the First Amendment. And later, we're actually going to hear from Alan Dershowitz, who wants to try to say this is a First Amendment thing. This has nothing to do with the First Amendment. These are private companies with terms of service. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll wait for the we'll wait for the Dershowitz thing. Somehow, at this event about Trump suing Facebook and Twitter, he ends up criticizing Dr. Fauci.
A lot of people ask me about Dr. Fauci. I like Dr. Fauci. I actually get along with him great. But they said, why didn't you fire him? I said, no, he was good. He'd recommend something. I do the opposite. And we always turned out to be right.
So I don't even know how that came up. And then at this point, Fox News just cut away. If you tuned to Fox, you no longer saw this. You instead saw a really important story where Jason Chaffetz was talking about the origins of COVID. Okay. Trump was then asked about what happened on January 6th. And the question was a good one. The framing was, well, the reason you ended up banned from these platforms was because of what you did on January 6th, inciting violence and all this different stuff. So what is your reaction to the fact that that's what you did? Do you wish you had done that differently? And somehow Trump ends up talking about Antifa.
Just to clarify, who should be the arbiter of what's hate, what's offensive, what should not be published, what goes beyond free speech?
Yeah.
And because so much of this, your banning has to do with comments you made around January 6th, just to clarify further, what did you do to stop the insurrection, as some people call it?
Right.
And why were you not able to stop it?
So that whole event, unfortunate event, just went through Congress and a report.
It was an unfortunate event, guys. That's all, right? It just that's all it was.
Stand back and stand by.
Yeah. Unfortunate.
Was issued and my name wasn't even mentioned. And I appreciate that. I was surprised, frankly, because I would have assumed that they would have come up with their typically biased, at least on the Democrat side, statement. The report came out, as you saw, 2 weeks ago. My name wasn't even mentioned. That was an unfortunate event. I say, though, however, people are being treated unbelievably unfairly.
So Trump is saying the perpetrators are being treated unfairly. He's asked, what did you do to stop it? Which is, indirectly reminding us that he fomented it. And he says, it was unfortunate, but the people who did the stuff are being treated really unfairly. They're the victims here.
When you look at people in prison and nothing happens to Antifa, and they burned down cities and killed people.
Antifa.
There were no guns in the Capitol.
That's not
true.
true.
They burned, except for the gun that shot Ashley Babbitt. And nobody knows who that man were. If that were the opposite way.
This is Trump, by the way, continuing to try to dox that officer.
That man would be all over. He would be the
guy's been cleared. You know, it's funny because when they when there's a situation where the left is saying, hey, this officer acted inappropriately, they immediately say, no, these officers, we have to defer to their judgment. They're in positions of danger, etc. Here, there was an investigation and it determined that the officer did not act inappropriately in shooting Ashley Babbitt, which was tragic regardless. But of course, she shouldn't have been there. Now, all of a sudden, Trump wants the guy doxxed, if you can imagine.
Most well-known, and I believe I can say man, because I believe I know exactly who it is.
Uh-oh.
But he would be the most well-known person in this country, in the world. But the person that shot Ashley Babbitt, boom, right through the head, just boom. There was no reason for that. And why isn't that person being opened up? And why isn't that being...
Open him up. Just take a scalpel to him and open him up. So Trump somehow ends up talking about, you know, Antifa and who knows what else. And then this is sort of like Trump's new line, which really applies to himself. And I don't think that he really gets it.
If you say it long enough, hard enough, often enough,
yeah,
people will start to believe it.
True.
That's what happened with Russia. That's what happened with Ukraine. That's what happened with, well, the worst is when they don't say it. Like the laptop from hell.
That laptop from hell still really bothering Trump. And it is true. If Trump repeats that he won the election long enough, and if the people around him start to repeat it, people start to believe it. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Now, let's just briefly go back to the First Amendment thing. Here is Alan Dershowitz, who has bizarrely become a big defender of Trump over the last few years, saying this really is an important First Amendment case. Listen to this.
Understanding is you have some of the tobacco attorneys involved in that class action suit involved in this case. Seems like a strong case, but obviously nothing is a slam dunk.
This is the most important First Amendment case of the 21st century, and it's important because it pits freedom of speech on the one hand against the First Amendment on the other hand. That may sound paradoxical, but remember, it's the high-tech giants that are banning freedom of speech. They are censoring, but they're claiming the right to do so under the First Amendment. So
this is maybe the biggest distortion I could imagine about this story. OK, so Dershowitz wants to claim this is about whose First Amendment speech is trumps the other. Does Trump have a First Amendment right to post to Twitter and Facebook and Google, which are private companies? Or do Facebook, Twitter and Google have a right not only under the First Amendment, but also under business regulation law, which Republicans are quick to defend when it's other situations, to enforce terms of service? So it is not actually a First Amendment case. That is the big lie with this lawsuit, is that this is really the First Amendment versus free speech and censorship. It's not. It is not that. This is quite simply Republicans who say don't regulate business now want the government to force Twitter to allow Trump to tweet. That is fundamentally what this is about. And it's outrageous. And the entire event was humiliating. It's going nowhere. It's going absolutely nowhere. Hey, things continuing to get worse for Donald Trump's former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Rudy's law license has now been suspended in Washington, D.C. The district, you might remember that recently Rudy's law license was suspended in New York. The District of Columbia now suspended Rudy Giuliani from practicing law in Washington. This was triggered automatically because Giuliani was suspended in the state of New York. My understanding is that Rudy is via reciprocity allowed or was allowed to practice in D.C. And so when the state from which you are receiving the reciprocity suspends your license, you are essentially automatically suspended. Giuliani's license to practice law in New York was suspended in a ruling that cited his false and misleading statements about the election loss of former President Donald Trump. Getting suspended in one state, in this case, prompting the automatic or near automatic suspension in D.C. But this is not really looking good for Rudy Giuliani. And you know what I was thinking, if Rudy Giuliani, for better or worse, in 2002, Rudy Giuliani had extraordinarily high approval. He had been mayor of New York at the time of 9/11. He could have retired then, and he would have remained, I believe, much beloved. Whatever you think about his handling of 9/11, the perception was that it was very good and that he brought people together, New Yorkers together, Americans together, etc. He could have retired in 2002. He could just have done consulting. He'd be rich. He'd be powerful. He would be beloved. And instead, he ends up known for farting during bogus hearings, if we can even call them that, about completely laughable voter fraud claims, gets COVID, takes him off of the trail of doing these hearings, then gets his law license suspended in New York. Now it's suspended in D.C. Trump has reportedly completely abandoned Rudy. It's not clear Rudy has even gotten paid the 20 grand a day that he was asking for to represent Trump in the election fraud matter. What a just torpedoing of a guy who, again, like him or not, for better or worse, like I'm not a big Giuliani guy, but I recognize he was significantly well liked in 2002. Not a great decision for Rudy Giuliani. As far as I can see, maybe in his mind, this is working out great for him. I just don't see it. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a caller confronting me about Joe Biden. Take a listen to this.
Hi, this is Tom from Maine. I'm willing to bet money that you're not going to answer this question.
Let's bet. How much do you want to bet? I'm going to answer it right now.
Do you think Biden should take a mental acuity test? Why or why not?
All right. So listen, I believe and have said before, we should, I don't know constitutionally if it can even be done. So I'm not saying legally this is feasible, but my belief is it would be great to do more screening and testing of people who want to be president. So I would be, if we're going to decide every presidential candidate gets a Montreal cognitive assessment for dementia, that's fantastic. Do it. If we want to decide every president has to at least respond to basic American history and Constitution questions, maybe they're not barred from running if they fail the test, but just so that we have the information. This is how this candidate did. I'm fine doing a whole bunch of this stuff. OK, I have no problem with that whatsoever. What is absurd is that on the basis of calling the Montreal cognitive assessment a mental acuity test, when really it's a course, that's COARSE. It's a course dementia screening. When Trump lies about the difficulty, the point of the test, the number of questions, when bogus videos are used of Joe Biden to justify Joe Biden needing to take it, or because Dr. Ronnie Jackson says Biden should take it, none of those are reasons for Biden to take it. I'm fine with Biden taking this test. No problem. If you want to make it a requirement of every candidate, I'm completely with you. The story that the right has woven about this test is totally bogus about what the test even is and what it does and everything about it. And that's where I have a problem. On the bonus show today, we'll talk about Bill Cosby. We will talk about a 4-day work week. We will talk about a heat wave becoming a mass casualty event. It's insane what's going on. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Get instant access by signing up at joinpakman.com. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blast Light is the world's smallest and most convenient UVC disinfection light to help keep you safe against COVID-19. I take mine everywhere I go. Go to davidpakman.com/blastlight to get it for 40% off. The link is down below.